Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the RX 5700 XT THICC II PCB from XFX. The pictures are from Tech PowerUp, so big thanks to them for providing high-res PCB pictures in their GPU reviews. There's going to be a link to their review down in the description below. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's get to taking a look at the card here. So it's not really, like, I wouldn't really consider this a custom PCB, but at the same time, it's not really reference. And the reason why I'm saying this is because basically the general layout of sort of everything, like, right in this area. Actually, that's wrong. It should be like... So basically, everything in this general area is pretty standardized. And then then everything outside that gets customized by the various various GPU vendors. So the thing is, it's like it's not really reference because you don't see the same. Like, it's actually not the same PCB as what you'd get on the blower cards. The blower cards get a nicer PCB than this, but at the same time, it's not completely custom, because you're going to see a very similar PCB from like the Sapphire Pulse, the Gigabyte gaming card, the MSI Evoke card, the Power Color Dual Fan. Like, all of these cards, they use a very similar PCB to this one right here. So I don't know, we can call it the yeah, like, well, that's kind of what it is. It's just like a baseline, I guess, the like cost optimized RX 5700 alternative PCB guidelines or something, because, you know, that's the thing, is there's no real fixed like this is the same thing every time, but it's very similar every time. So yeah, anyway, with that out of the way, let's get into the important things like the Vcore VRM. Damn it, why did I do that? Bam. Well, let's just get into the VRM, starting off with, of course, the one I consider the most important, which is the Vcore. And this is a 1, 2, 3, that's not a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 phase design, which is completely normal for an RX 5700 XT, as that is handled by this controller right here, which that is an IR35217. This goes up to 7 plus, well, I might do 8 plus 0, but it's normally been seen in like 6 plus 2 and 7 plus 1 configurations. Here it's running a 7 plus 1, right? So that's where we get our Vcore. This is for the, it's going to be the SOC rail, and that's Vcore. So it's kind of that. If we go back to the front of the card, so yes, this is a true 7-phase. That controller is fully digital, goes up to 2 megahertz switching frequency. It's basically like it's as good as it gets from International Rectifier, but it's also, well, ignoring the newer controllers that they have, like the XDPE 132G5C. But for AMD GPUs, you really can't get anything better than a 35217, because as far as I know, well, I've not seen anything other than a 35217 used on an AMD GPU yet. Though apparently the XDPE 132G5C should support the AMD GPU power delivery like requirements. So that one might show up on like some huge AMD like data center class GPU, maybe like next year or something. But yeah, so for now, basically 35217 is as good as it gets. So yeah, real 7-phase right here. For the actual power stages, we are looking at NCP 3021. That's not a 2. 21, 55, well, 55s. And these are basically 55 amp DR MOS. So, you know, you've got your driver, you got your 2 MOSFETs, and you ain't got nothing else. No current monitoring, no temperature well, I think they might have temperature monitoring, but do they? I mean, no, they don't. There's that I'm pretty sure that's like a thermistor right there. Let me check. I have the data sheet still opened up. I don't know why I didn't include that in my notes. Okay, they have a thermal warning output and a thermal shutdown system built in. But I don't think they have actual, like, built-in temperature monitoring capabilities. Let me check. Yeah, okay. If it gets too hot, it'll basically just pull. Yeah, it'll tell the controller, hey, I'm too hot, but it won't actually tell the controller I'm at this temperature. So okay. So yeah, so I was right. This probably is actually what's handling the temperature sensing. Anyway, yeah, so we're looking at a bunch of these, and they're a bit dumb, but they do have a built-in thermal protection, which is actually more than I was expecting, because actually the bare minimum for DR MOS is like just a driver and some MOSFETs, and that's it. Like, it doesn't actually need to be capable of like temperature protection or anything. It's just like it needs to integrate the usually like two MOSFETs and a driver into one package. That's all. But anyway, so yeah, that's what we're looking at here. These are the lowest spec power stages you can get on a RX 5700 XT, at least from what I've seen. It's not a huge deal because it doesn't make much of a difference to the power delivery. Like, it doesn't really make a big difference to the efficiency. But it is definitely like, like this is already kind of the cost optimized variant of a 5700 XT PCB. And, well, this is probably about as cost optimized as it gets, with the 55 amp DR MOS, 55 amp power stages here. Anyway, the end result of having 7 phases of these is that at 1.2 volts output, 500 kilohertz switching frequency, and 5 volts drive voltage. Drive voltage, you're going to be looking at the following efficiency figures. So 150 amps output, you're going to be seeing about 15 watts of heat being produced by the power stages. At 200 amps output, you're going to be seeing about 23 watts. And for 250 amps, it's going to be producing about 33 watts. And at 280 amps, because unfortunately these are 55 amp parts, but the data sheet stops at 40 amps. 280 amps, you're going to be looking at about 41 watts of heat. So that's not like... Well, this isn't great. Like, definitely the reference card actually does better at 208. Actually, the reference card does better at, I think, like straight up 300 amps output. It does better. But at a 250 amps as well. But at 200 amps and 150 amps, this actually doesn't, like, this PCB doesn't have like a significant disadvantage over what you'd get with a reference card, as even the reference card is like 19 watts at 200 amps, and at 150 it's only it's 14 amps, because that's really like you're getting into below the peak of the efficiency curve of the 70 amp smart power stages that the AMD reference cards use. So yeah, in kind of typical AMD fashion, the reference PCB is really nice. But yeah, even here with like up to the thing is with VRMs, it really depends on how you're cooling them. 33 watts of heat is definitely like handleable. It's just that, like, you actually need to do something about it. Like, you can't run fully passive and have 33 watts coming out of a 7-phase VRM. Like, that's just not gonna be coolable. 15 watts on a 7-phase might be possible to do passive, depending on, like, a number of factors. Like, how much surface area does the heatsink sitting on top of the VRM have, for example, right? And then how good is the PCB itself at dissipating heat? But yeah, for normal overclocking usage, you're probably going to be looking into this range, and I'm going to assume like, well, you're going to not, like, if you're buying this card, you're probably not going to swap out the heatsink, I'd say, is a fair assumption to make. So yeah, under those conditions, like, you're going to have VRM cooling because that's just integrated into the cooling system of the GPU. So if you don't, swap out the heatsink, I really wouldn't be concerned about the heat output of this VRM right here. So yeah, like, it is definitely not the nicest Vcore VRM you can get on an RX 5700 XT. But at the same time, if you're not going to be doing like even water cooling, you're going to be fine with this. Like, there's really not, like, it's not great, but it's not bad enough that it would actually cause any issues in terms of the heat output of the VRM. So, yeah, that's the thing. And the other thing is, unless you straight up go for a reference card, like, you're not getting a VRM that's significantly better. Like, the next upgrade up, like, say, the Pulse card and the Gigabyte Gaming OC card, they use 60 amp power stages, and it's like, those are very slightly better, because that's a 5 amp difference in spec, right? Like, they're very slightly better. The 70 amps more power stages, bigger improvement, but 55 amps versus 60 amp parts, it's basically the same thing. So that's kind of the thing. It's just like, yeah, this is probably the cheapest implementation of this VRM there is. It's still not bad enough to really go like, oh yeah, this is a disaster. And also, if you're actually water cooling, you're probably going to end up with with a reference PCB just for convenience sake, because the water blocks are designed for the reference PCB, and I'd say that's actually like with NVIDIA, a lot of the time I feel like buying a reference NVIDIA card and then slapping a water block on it kind of sucks, because normally you'd be getting an inferior PCB. With AMD cards, it's just like, well, it's very unlikely you'd get something better than reference. So unless you were looking at back in the day, you could get like a 290X Lightning or a Matrix card or something like that. And those would actually be like significant upgrades over the reference cards. But otherwise, you were just going to like get a reference card. It's already pretty good, or really good, depending on which exact card you're looking at. Anyway, so yeah, the Vcore VRM here, while unimpressive, is not really anything worth worrying about, even though, yeah, it's really not great. The SOC VRM, I mean, here's the thing. It's just like the 55 amp power stages just end up everywhere. So this down here, I assume, is the SOC VRM. That is another NCP 302155. It's going to be completely fine. It's, it's like the core at stock is going to be pulling somewhere around 200 amps. And, well, I really wish I actually knew exactly what each of these little, exactly how much power each of the minor voltage regulators on the minor rails on these cards pulled. But the thing is, the core is not going to be pulling the cards are like 200 to, some of them are some of the custom cards are hitting 300 watts. So the cores are probably running, the memory system in its entirety is probably around 50 watts. And I wouldn't say all of that's going into the GDDR6. I'm pretty sure a good chunk of that is just being sucked up by the SoC rail now. As well as on AMD cards, the VDDCI rail actually also is a huge, is basically, on GDDR5 cards at least, basically half of the power the memory system of a AMD card on GDDR5 would pull would be through the VDDCI rail, which is just this is great. It's a great memory controller you got there. It's pulling almost as much power as all of the memory chips combined. So yeah, anyway, I assume this one down here is the SoC rail. We've got a 55 amp power stage for that. Not really concern worthy whatsoever. Not worth talking about the heat output, because, it's going to be in the single digits, right? So it's not a big deal. Anyway, up here we have the split memory VRM, and this is controlled by the IR35217. Anyway, up here we have the memory VRMs. So, these provide the main voltage for the GDDR6. So all of the memory chips, so that's the 1.35 volts for those. We've got yet more of the NCP 302155s, right? This one here, that one there. These are controlled by this chip over here, which this is the NCP 81022. This controller has up to 4 phases on its main output, and I want to say it's up to 2 on its secondary, but here it doesn't really matter if I remember the max spec of this thing, because here it's just running as a 2+1, the +1 being used for this rail down here, which I assume is VDDCI. The VDDCI and the SoC rails might be switched around. I'm just assuming this is VDDCI because the SoC, as far as I know, is controlled by the 35217, and the 35217 is right there. So it doesn't make any sense to put your SoC rail over here if your controller for it is there, and you have a rail down here that is identical in terms of components. It's just do that. and do that. Easier, much simpler than like running like you'd basically, because it's not just the PWM lines, you also have current sensing lines. So you'd be running, multiple like signal lines from the freaking controller to the phase over there. Like, no, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to do. Anyway, so I assume that's the VDDCI rail, and that is another NCP 302155. So yeah, none of these, like, these are actually better spec than some of the other cards, because that's kind of the interesting thing is, like, say the Pulse. The Pulse does go for 60 amp power stages in the Vcore, but then it goes for 50s on like the VMAM, the VDDCI, and SOC rail, because these are like minor rails. They really don't matter. And I guess what happened with XFX here is just like, well, does it really make any sense to buy any, like, if you're already buying a 55 amp power stage for your Vcore, does it make sense to downgrade to a 50 for your other rails? Not really, right? Like, that's probably not gonna save any money doing that. So you just end up with the 55 amp power stage everywhere. Now, fun fact, the actual reference card that uses the 70 amp smart power stage on every single rail. So it's like, even on, VMEM, you have two 70 amp smart power stages. On VDDCI, you have another 70. On the SOC, you have another 70. And then this controller right here, so the NCP 81022, it's basically cheaper than an IR 35217 because it's less capable than a 35217. Not that that really matters for like your memory rail or your VDDCI. Like, those are minor rails. They don't pull that much power. They don't really, they're not that difficult to deal with. From the controller's perspective. So you don't really need a 35217 there. And really the 35217, I assume, mostly is like an upgrade to the power management capabilities. So like how quickly you can adjust the output voltage and that kind of thing. Not necessarily how well it deals with like transients or something like that. So, current transients. So, that's kind of the thing, is just like but the reference card uses a 35217 for VMAM and VDDCI, because I guess the reference card was a case of like, well, we're buying all these really expensive components and we don't feel like buying cheaper ones, so we'll just use them for everything. But anyway, this PCB right here, yeah, it opts for the NCP 81022. This controller, like, what I actually kind of like about this controller is this thing is super easy to hard mod. You can remove the current limit by I think it's literally just removing a resistor. It's been a while since I last worked with this controller, but you basically remove a resistor, no more current limit. And then it's just a simple feedback mod for voltage controls. So yeah, this thing's super easy to modify. So if you wanted to mess with your memory voltage or your VDD, well, I assume VDDCI rail voltage, then you would just do that over this controller with a couple of basically like potentiometers, and then you might have to remove one or two resistors if you run into any current limits. So yeah, that's kind of the thing, is like this thing is super easy to hard mod. Whereas the 35217 isn't, because that is completely digital, so you can't really set anything, like there's no resistors for configuring the current limit, because you program that into the chip. Whereas with this one, there's a resistor externally that controls that, right? Which means easier to mod, but less advanced in terms of like software controls. Not that AMD really gives you that much in the way of software control for the Vcore VRM anyway, so, that's kind of that. So yeah, that's kind of the thing with this card, is this is basically like the downcosted version, like low cost alternative PCB version for the RX 5700 XT. So, like one of the main differences, like, yeah, you have the controller over there. That's a cheaper controller. The power stages are cheaper than what you get on your reference cards. But another big difference is that the reference card goes for like SMD capacitors freaking everywhere. And in fact, for the input, input filtering, so for the plus 12 volts filtering, it goes for a bunch of tantalums. And the thing about tantalum and just SMD aluminum polymers is that they are very, very expensive compared to your through-hole aluminum polymers. So this is another one of those just sort of cost-saving measures that we see with the well, the cost optimized PCB for the 5700 XT, where it's just like, yeah, instead of using expensive SMD capacitors, you use your through hole ones. And then to compensate for the fact that these have a higher ESL and ESR can actually be the same, but you're definitely not going to have the same ESL. So to compensate for the higher ESL, you basically see a lot more multi-layer ceramics. If you look at a reference card, like the output filtering capacitors are basically like you have your polymers, you have the SMDs, and then you basically, well, technically multi-layer ceramics are also SMDs, so that doesn't count, but you have the aluminum polymers, and then you have a couple more multi-layer ceramics sort of jammed in between the inductors, and that's it. But if we look at like this card, you know, we have all of the aluminum polymer through holes right here, and then we have all of these multi-layer ceramics right in front of them. And then if we go on the back of the card, we have more multi-layer ceramics over here. Right, we can still see that those are on the Vcore power plane, and then we have even more of them back here, which on the reference card, like you straight up wouldn't have this. Like on the back of the card, you basically just have a couple aluminum like SMD caps, SMD polymers, you know, sitting on the Vcore output, and then on the front of the card, you have a couple more multi-layer ceramics. That's it. But that's actually more expensive to do than to go with a bunch of multi-layer ceramics and some through-hole capacitors. And we see that on every rail on this card. Like, if you look at the reference PCB, it goes for a much more, like a much higher number of SMD capacitors because, yeah, it's like reference AMD PCBs. Like, for some reason, AMD just loves to splurge on their PCBs and then give you god-awful cooling systems because, you know, that... Like, consumers will notice that their PCB is better, you know, it's like, nah, they won't. But they will hear the cooling system. They'll notice that part, for sure. Anyway, so now XFX hasn't, like, totally, you know, just cut out features everywhere here. You know, they've down, like, we have the down costing of the various components, but they do give us dual BIOS functionality, which I'd argue is kind of useless on a 5700 XT. Because, well, you can't flash custom BIOSes on these cards, so it's just like, well, yeah, that's I don't know what I'd use that switch for. I mean, it's not like it doesn't hurt anything, but it doesn't, like, unlike on, say, a Vega or something, it just doesn't, and even on a Vega, like on a Vega 56, dual BIOS, useful. On a Vega 64, not useful because it's a bloody Vega, well, no, Vega 64s, you still flash them up to the Liquid Edition, so, you know, the dual BIOS can save your ass if you screw up a BIOS flash, or more like it's really convenient to have dual BIOS if you screw up a BIOS flash compared to the alternative, which is you have a second GPU, and then like there's a way to live without a BIOS switch, but it's just nicer to have the BIOS switch. But with a 5700 XT, like there's not really anything better than whatever this comes with that you could like flash it to, right? Like that's the thing is like it's a 5700 XT. That's it. There's nothing more to upgrade to in terms of BIOSes. Now on a 5700, that switch is actually kind of useful, but 5700 XT, it's just like eh. And this is actually an upgrade over the reference card because for the first time in a long time, AMD has decided that, you know, for their reference cards, they're not doing dual BIOS. I guess it's because they've completely kind of cracked down on BIOS modding. So yeah, that's, you know, oh well. But yeah, that's kind of the only thing that XFX adds to this PCB compared to like, say, well, Sapphire with their Pulse card, right? They add a bunch of fuses. Gigabyte with their card has a, like, they actually have a kind of more intricate output filtering configuration for their Vcore VRM compared to all of the other cards I've seen so far, even though they don't actually do anything to any of the other rails. Yeah, so that's kind of it. Like, XFX has made the PCB longer. That's one other thing they've done. Like, this is, I think, one of the longest, this is one of the longest implementations of this portion of the PCB, right? They've just kind of extended it right here. But yeah, they really, like, the THICC II is, I guess, it's kind of supposed to be a high-end card, but here, like, PCB-wise, it's just like, well, it's a 5700 XT PCB. There's not really much else to it. It's not, you know, it's definitely not on par with like the likes of the Red Devil or the Strix or the Gaming X that recently like MSI released, or I wouldn't really consider this even on par with like the Gigabyte PCB for the gaming OC card they have. Or, I mean, technically it's slightly worse than what you get on the Pulse, but it's just like, it's a really minor difference in the VRM department, and it's like the same thing as the Evoke PCB, just longer. So yeah, that's the THICC II. You know, it's not bad. I'm just not impressed because it's this is kind of the minimum. Like it's the bare minimum of what you could use for a 5700 XT. It just so happens that the bare minimum for a 5700 XT doesn't suck, right? So that's kind of that. Like, it's not on the levels, like, because the thing is, if you look at like down-costed PCBs throughout history, the worst example I can think of is like there was a 7970 PCB that was a 4-phase. Like, it was bad because the reference cards were shipping as a 5-phase, and then you had like, and the reference cards were like a 5-phase with really nice direct FETs from International Rectifier, and then there was a 4-phase 7970. Like, that PCB was so awful that the manufacturers that used it would lock down the voltage control, because you could, like, if you overvolted that, you were running a major risk of sending them a card back for RMA, right? And like they wouldn't really have any way to prove that you overvolted it, so the solution was just prevent end users from overvolting it. That way it won't blow up because it's built like garbage. So this is definitely not as bad as those were, but it's not impressive. That's for sure, you know. And that's kind of a shame because, well, the THICC II, the THICC II's heatsink does actually, like, it looks really nice. It also doesn't seem to perform that well in terms of cooling performance compared to some of the other 5700 XTs, and you can read all about that in the Tech Power review, which I ripped all of these pictures from. Yeah, so it's kind of that. That's the XFX THICC II PCB right here. It's a 5700 XT. And with that, I guess thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon where you can support me directly. And I also have a Teespring where you can buy things like stickers, posters, shirts, hoodies, socks. And, you know, those also support running the AHOC channel. Like, like I actually, like, those actually help out. It's not like Teespring is taking, you know, 90% of the sale as their cut. So yeah. Anyway, I don't know why I'm pushing my merch so much. Like, honestly, like, if you want to check it out, check it out. If you don't check it out. Like, yeah. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.